Some people run from danger. Others run from consequences. But perhaps the hardest thing any human being ever runs from is themselves. The version they wish nobody remembered. The mistake they cannot undo. The betrayal they try to justify. The guilt waiting quietly in the dark whenever life slows down. Because no matter how far people travel, no matter how successful they become, no matter how much they build, the past has a strange habit of following, quietly, patiently, like footsteps behind memory. And perhaps no biblical figure understood this more painfully than Jacob. Jacob, history remembers him strangely. Chosen by God, father of nations, the man whose name became Israel, a spiritual giant, a patriarch, a survivor. Yet beneath those titles hide something deeply uncomfortable. Jacob began as deceiver, manipulator, the younger brother, the son who stole, the man running from a family he helped break. And perhaps this is what makes his story feel so hauntingly human. Because Jacob is not hero in the way people expect. Not noble from the beginning. Not courageous immediately. Not morally clear. Instead, he feels painfully familiar. A complicated man trying desperately to secure love, security, blessing, identity, even if he had to manipulate life to get it. And perhaps that is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because many people secretly understand Jacob more than they want to admit. The fear of not being enough. The fear someone else will always be chosen. The fear there will not be enough love, enough success, enough security, enough belonging. And fear. Fear changes people. Fear teaches survival. Sometimes beautiful survival. Sometimes ugly survival. Sometimes manipulation disguised as wisdom. Sometimes control disguised as responsibility. And perhaps Jacob learned this early, because before he became patriarch, before angels, before wrestling with God, before redemption, he was simply a younger brother growing up inside comparison, inside favoritism, inside family tension nobody healed. Imagine childhood in that house. A father loving Esau, a mother loving Jacob, division hidden inside ordinary life, two sons learning quietly. Love feels uneven here. Belonging feels fragile here. Security must be earned here. Children adapt to environments quickly. The strong child becomes stronger. The clever child becomes smarter. The loud child demands attention. The quiet child learns strategy. And Jacob learned observation, patience, calculation, perhaps survival itself. Because when children fear losing, they often learn control. Control the situation, control the outcome, control relationships, control uncertainty. Maybe Jacob feared something simple. If I do not secure blessing, someone else will receive it. Someone stronger, someone easier to love, someone more wanted. And standing beside him his entire childhood was Esau, the older brother, stronger, faster, father's favorite, the hunter, the man born first, the man naturally expected to inherit. Can you imagine how comparison shaped Jacob? The younger sibling watching admiration move toward someone else. The quiet ache. What about me? Will anyone choose me too? How many people understand this feeling? The overlooked sibling. The child who learned achievement because affection felt uncertain. The adult still trying to prove worth. Still chasing blessing. Still afraid love belongs more naturally to someone else. Because perhaps Jacob's story begins with fear. Not evil. Fear. Fear of losing. Fear of being unseen. Fear of not receiving what others seemed born to inherit. And fear often teaches dangerous lessons. If life feels unfair, take control. If love feels uncertain, secure it yourself. If blessing feels fragile, do whatever necessary. Even deception, even manipulation, even betrayal. And one ordinary day, a bowl of stew changes everything. Esau hungry, Jacob calculating, one brother emotional, one brother strategic. The birthright traded, a future exchanged. But perhaps the real tragedy was never the stew, because something darker still waited. A father growing old, eyes fading, a blessing approaching, and a son deciding honesty no longer felt safe enough. Imagine the moment, Jacob wearing Esau's clothes, animal skin covering his arms, pretending to be someone else. Pause there. Can you feel how heartbreaking that image really is? A son believing he must become someone else to receive blessing. Many people still live this way, changing personalities, performing, achieving, pretending, becoming whatever earns approval, because somewhere deep inside, they fear themselves may never be enough. And then, the theft, the deception, the blessing stolen, the brother betrayed, the family shattered. Suddenly, Jacob has everything he wanted, the blessing, the inheritance, the future. Except peace disappears, trust disappears, home disappears, because something terrifying happens. After getting what he wanted, he must run. Run from Esau's anger, run from consequences, run from guilt, run from family collapse. And perhaps this becomes Jacob's deepest paradox. He finally receives blessing, yet immediately loses safety. He wins, yet cannot stay. How painfully human, because sometimes people chase something desperately, only to discover achievement cannot silence guilt. Success cannot erase betrayal. Control cannot create peace. And perhaps Jacob spent years learning what many people eventually discover: you cannot outrun unresolved pain. Not through distance, not through success, not through new relationships, not through distraction. The past follows, especially family pain, especially betrayal, especially wounds people refuse facing. Yet perhaps Jacob's story feels hopeful too, because unlike many people, Jacob eventually stops running, eventually breaks, eventually wrestles, eventually changes. But transformation comes painfully, not quickly, not easily. Because before redemption comes confrontation, before healing comes honesty, before peace comes wrestling. And Jacob would spend an entire lifetime learning something terrifying. The hardest battle was never with Esau, never with family, never with circumstance. The hardest battle was the one happening inside himself. Tonight, we uncover one of Scripture's most psychologically fascinating men, the younger brother, the manipulator, the runaway, the deceiver, or perhaps the wounded child still trying desperately to feel secure. This is the story of Jacob, the man who stole a blessing, but spent a lifetime running. And before this story ends, you may begin wondering whether people run because they are guilty, or because deep down, they still fear they are not enough. Some children are born into peace. Others are born into tension. Not necessarily loud tension, not always screaming, not always broken homes. Sometimes tension hides quietly inside family dynamics, inside comparison, inside unequal closeness, inside love that feels slightly uneven. And children feel everything, long before they understand it, long before they can explain it. Because family becomes the first place humans learn what love feels like, what belonging feels like, what safety feels like. And perhaps nowhere does this feel more painfully important than in the childhood of Jacob. Because before Jacob became deceiver, before he became patriarch, before angels and wrestling and redemption, He was simply a boy growing up inside emotional division. A boy quietly learning something dangerous. Love feels uncertain here. To understand Jacob, we must go back before memory, before rivalry, before resentment had words, back to something strange, something symbolic. The story says conflict began before he and Esau were even born. Their mother, Rebekah, felt struggle inside her womb. Not ordinary movement, conflict. The children fought before birth. A disturbing image. Though rivalry entered the family before either child even understood life. And perhaps that detail matters more than it first appears. Because some children enter emotionally complicated worlds. The marriage strained. The expectations heavy. The atmosphere already tense. The child does not create the environment. The child absorbs it. Psychologists understand this deeply. Children are emotional observers long before they become emotional speakers. They notice stress, energy, distance, preference. And perhaps Jacob entered exactly this kind of family system. Born second, always second. Pause there, because birth order matters emotionally, especially in ancient families, especially where inheritance shaped destiny. Esau emerged first, strong, hairy, powerful. The older brother, naturally expected to inherit, naturally expected to lead, naturally expected to receive. Jacob followed, quietly, holding his brother's heel. Even his entrance into the world looked symbolic, already reaching, already grasping, already close, yet somehow behind. Can you imagine growing up beside someone like Esau? Bigger, stronger, more physically impressive. The kind of son fathers naturally admire, especially ancient fathers, especially masculine fathers. And Isaac loved Esau. The scriptures say this clearly. Because Esau hunted, provided food, connected naturally through activity, shared masculine energy. The kind of relationship easier to build between fathers and sons. Meanwhile, Jacob remained different, quiet, reflective, closer to home. Not less valuable, just different. And difference often becomes vulnerability inside families, especially when comparison enters. But then comes one sentence quietly shaping everything. One sentence almost devastating in its simplicity. Isaac loved Esau. Rebekah loved Jacob. Pause there, because psychology immediately notices what theology often rushes past. Favoritism, not necessarily intentional, not necessarily cruel, but real. Parents often love all children, yet connect differently, understand differently, feel emotionally safer with certain personalities. This is deeply human, but human things still won't. Imagine young Jacob growing up, watching, observing. Children like Jacob observe everything. Who gets attention? Who gets approval? Who seems easier to love? Who feels emotionally secure? Perhaps Jacob noticed father's pride around Esau. The meals shared, the hunting stories, the masculine admiration. Maybe he quietly understood. Father understands him more naturally. Children rarely say these things aloud. They simply feel them. And feelings shape identity. Psychologists understand something painful here. Children growing up inside emotional imbalance often become hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant, careful, strategic, trying to secure belonging, especially quieter children. Especially children fearing invisibility. Could Jacob quietly fear becoming less important? Perhaps. Imagine standing beside someone naturally admired, the athletic sibling, the outgoing sibling, the confident sibling. Meanwhile, you feel quieter, smaller, less obvious. Many younger siblings understand this feeling deeply. The comparison never spoken aloud, yet constantly felt. How do you secure love when someone else seems naturally gifted at receiving it? Some children rebel, some withdraw, some achieve, some manipulate, and some, like Jacob perhaps, learn strategy. Control becomes survival. If life feels uncertain, control the outcome. If blessing feels fragile, secure it yourself. If love feels uneven, find another way. Psychologists call this adaptive behavior. Children learning emotional survival strategies. Not evil, not malicious, protective. Jacob may have learned something dangerous very early. Nothing feels guaranteed. Not attention, not security, not inheritance, especially not for second sons. This matters enormously because insecurity changes personality. Children feeling emotionally uncertain often become planners, observers, controllers, people trying to reduce unpredictability. Not because they enjoy manipulation, because fear teaches strategy. Meanwhile, Jacob and Rebecca grow close, very close. This matters too. Some scholars notice emotional intensity here. Jacob stays near tense, near mother, near safety. Perhaps Rebecca protected him, trusted him, understood him. Children often bond intensely with parent, offering emotional security, especially if another relationship feels uncertain. Could Jacob feel emotionally safer with Rebecca than Isaac? Likely. But safety sometimes carries unintended consequences too. Because favoritism shapes identity in complicated ways, the favored child often feels pressure, dependency, fear of losing closeness. The less favored child feels insecurity, competition. Both children suffer differently. This becomes important later, because Jacob grows up not only loved, but protected, perhaps even quietly reinforced. Rebecca may have believed, Jacob deserves blessing too. Jacob must survive. Jacob must not lose. And children internalize parental fear quickly. Imagine hearing subtle messages for years. Be careful. Think ahead. Your brother is stronger. Life is unfair. Protect yourself. You matter too. Nothing feels guaranteed. These messages quietly shape worldview, and perhaps nowhere becomes more dangerous than sibling rivalry. Because siblings, inside favoritism, rarely feel secure. Competition quietly enters. Comparison quietly grows. The brother versus brother dynamic begins. Esau becomes father's son. Jacob becomes mother's son. Different worlds inside one household. Can you imagine family dinners? The subtle division, the different energies, the emotional alliances. This still happens constantly today. Mom's favorite, dad's favorite, the golden child, the overlooked child, the quiet rivalry everyone pretends does not exist. Yet, children feel it deeply. Psychologists repeatedly confirm something important. Perceived favoritism shapes sibling relationships for decades. Resentment, jealousy, competition, identity wounds. Adults still carry pain from childhood comparison. The sibling more loved, more trusted, more celebrated. And perhaps Jacob carried a quieter wound. The fear, he will never naturally receive what Esau receives. Pause there. This fear changes people. People fearing scarcity behave differently. If love feels limited, compete. If blessing feels uncertain, take control. If opportunity feels fragile, secure advantage. Modern people understand this too. The child competing for parental approval, the sibling always proving themselves, the adult overachiever secretly afraid of not being enough, the quiet fear beneath success. If I stop earning love, will anyone still choose me? Could Jacob quietly carry this fear? Quite possibly. And maybe, just maybe, this explains everything later. The stew, the deception, the manipulation, not simple greed, not simple evil. Fear. Fear disguised as control. The child once uncertain becoming adult, desperate for security. Still, let us remain fair. Jacob made choices, important choices. Pain explains behavior. Pain does not remove responsibility. This matters, because wounded people still make moral decisions. Fear may shape action, but fear does not fully excuse betrayal. Yet, understanding matters, because suddenly, Jacob stops looking like villain and starts looking painfully human. The quiet child, the anxious child, the strategic child, the younger brother afraid life may pass him by. The son, learning something dangerous. If blessing does not come naturally, maybe I must take it. And somewhere ahead, a hungry brother waits, a bowl of stew waits, and aging father waits, and years of quiet insecurity will finally collide with opportunity, because children shaped by favoritism rarely stop competing. Eventually, competition grows into something larger, something painful, something irreversible, and perhaps the deepest tragedy had already begun long before the deception. Maybe Jacob was never only stealing blessing. Maybe he was trying desperately to secure something he feared he might never receive naturally. Belonging. Before Jacob became deceiver, before he became patriarch, before he wrestled angels in the dark, he was simply a younger brother trying to survive inside a world that rarely felt secure. And perhaps this matters more than people realize, because human beings are shaped long before their biggest mistakes, long before betrayal, long before consequences. Identity forms quietly, inside families, inside comparison, inside fear, inside emotional lessons children never consciously choose, yet deeply absorb. And Jacob grew up learning something dangerous. Strength alone would never protect him, because standing beside Esau meant constantly feeling smaller. Pause there. Imagine childhood beside someone naturally larger than life. Esau enters rooms loudly, strong, physical, confident. The outdoorsman, the hunter, the kind of child fathers naturally admire. Meanwhile, Jacob feels quieter, different, not weaker necessarily, just different. The reflective child, the observant child, the son staying close to home, the son noticing things others miss. Different children survive differently. Psychologists understand this deeply. Children adapt to environments instinctively. The loud child becomes louder. The shy child becomes more observant. The overlooked child becomes more strategic. Because survival teaches personality as much as biology does. And perhaps Jacob learned very early. He cannot compete physically, so I must survive another way. Imagine the dynamic. Esau strong. Father's favorite, older brother, natural heir. Everything seemingly stacked in his favor. And Jacob, second, always second. The younger son, the quieter son, the son who perhaps feared invisibility. Many younger siblings understand this feeling intimately. Standing beside someone naturally celebrated, naturally gifted, naturally noticed. The child quietly asking, "How do I matter here? How do I get seen? How do I secure a place?" Children rarely ask these questions consciously. They simply adapt. And adaptation becomes identity. Psychologists sometimes call this compensatory development, the child strengthening what environment rewards. If strength feels unavailable, develop intelligence. If attention feels uncertain, develop strategy. If security feels fragile, develop control. Perhaps Jacob learned strategy because strategy felt safer than strength. Observe, think ahead, anticipate outcomes. Prepare, plan. Control uncertainty. This matters enormously, because people often misunderstand manipulative personalities. Manipulation rarely begins with cruelty. Often, it begins with fear. Fear of losing, fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of not receiving what feels necessary. Control becomes survival. Imagine young Jacob watching family dynamics. He notices everything. Mother emotionally closer, father emotionally farther, Esau naturally admired, blessing naturally expected to move elsewhere. And perhaps slowly, an internal belief forms. Nothing is guaranteed. If I want security, I must create it myself. This belief shapes lives. Modern psychology sees it constantly. Children growing up around emotional uncertainty often become planners, controllers, perfectionists, high achievers, people uncomfortable trusting life, people uncomfortable waiting, because waiting feels dangerous. Trust feels risky. What if no one chooses me? What if I lose? What if I end up forgotten? Could Jacob quietly carry this fear? Very likely. And perhaps nowhere feels more important than the relationship with Rebecca, his mother, because emotional closeness matters deeply. Children often form identity through safest attachment, and Jacob stayed close to her, near tense, near emotional familiarity, near predictability. Some scholars even describe him as quiet or peaceful, but quiet people are often misunderstood. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet people often think deeply, observe deeply, feel deeply. Jacob may have simply learned something essential. The world rewards preparation, and preparation became protection. This still happens constantly today. The child growing up uncertain becomes adult, overthinking everything. The anxious planner, the perfectionist, the person needing control before feeling safe, the one checking messages repeatedly, the one preparing for every possible failure, the person saying, just like being organized. Meanwhile, underneath often lives fear. If I stay prepared, maybe life cannot hurt me. If I stay ahead, maybe disappointment cannot surprise me. Could Jacob become this kind of person? Perhaps, because children shaped by comparison often fear scarcity. Not enough love, not enough approval, not enough belonging, not enough blessing. Scarcity changes behavior. Imagine Jacob watching Esau receive admiration naturally. Strength admired, masculinity admired, father's closeness, the future seemingly guaranteed. How does quieter child respond? Sometimes with sadness, sometimes resentment, sometimes determination, and sometimes strategy. Psychologists understand sibling dynamics deeply. Children growing up beside highly valued siblings often develop alternative strengths. The smart sibling, the funny sibling, the caring sibling, the strategic sibling. Identity forms reactively. Who must I become to matter here? Maybe Jacob quietly decided, if strength wins attention, then intelligence must secure survival. And perhaps something painful happened slowly. The younger brother stopped trusting natural fairness. Pause there. This matters deeply, because people believing life is unfair behave differently. The child repeatedly, feeling second, learns, do not wait. Take opportunity. Protect yourself. Secure outcomes. This can become both strength and wound. Jacob survives because of strategy. Yet strategy later damages relationships too. This paradox feels painfully human. Or strengths often grow from wounds. The child learning emotional awareness becomes empathetic adult, yet anxious too. The child becoming independent becomes resilient, yet struggles trusting people. The strategic child becomes successful, yet controlling. Jacob's brilliance and brokenness may share same roots. Fear. fear disguised as preparation. Still, let us remain fair. Jacob was not villain from beginning. People oversimplify him too quickly. He was observant, patient, emotionally intelligent, capable, reflective. Traits often admirable. Many leaders survive because of foresight. Many families survive because someone thinks ahead. Many wounded people develop extraordinary wisdom precisely because life felt uncertain. This matters because trauma often sharpens awareness. The child watching carefully becomes adult, noticing what others miss. Perhaps Jacob understood people deeply, understood timing deeply, understood weakness deeply, especially Esau's. And here, something dangerous quietly grows. When people feel insecure long enough, opportunity begins looking different, not moral, necessary. If life feels unfair, taking feels justified. The strategic mind begins rationalizing. He already has more. He deserves something too. No one would choose me otherwise. This is how fear becomes manipulation, quietly, gradually. Psychologists call this defensive adaptation. Behavior originally protecting vulnerability, eventually causing damage. Jacob's strategy kept him emotionally safe, until it stopped being safety and became control. And perhaps nowhere does this feel more haunting than one ordinary day. Esau returns hungry, exhausted, depleted. Jacob sees weakness, and suddenly, years of insecurity meet opportunity. The quieter brother no longer feels powerless. For once, control belongs to him. Imagine the emotional moment. The younger sibling finally holding leverage. The child always second, suddenly able to shape outcome. The temptation enormous. Not simply food. Power. Security. Possibility. And perhaps something old whispers quietly. If I do not secure blessing now, he may never receive it. How many people understand this feeling? The fear that opportunity disappears forever. The anxiety pushing people toward questionable choices. The belief, if I do not take control, someone else will get everything. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom, and perhaps that is Jacob's tragedy. He did not only learn strategy, he learned distrust. Distrust that life would provide naturally. Distrust that love would arrive safely. Distrust that blessing would come honestly. This still happens constantly. The employee sabotaging coworkers because success feels scarce. The partner becoming controlling because love feels uncertain. The parent micromanaging because fear feels overwhelming. People hurt by scarcity often create scarcity everywhere. Still, Jacob remains deeply human, not evil, not monstrous, wounded, smart, afraid, trying desperately to secure something he feared losing before he ever had it. And maybe that is why his story still matters. Because many people secretly live like Jacob, planning constantly, overthinking constantly, trying to control life before life disappoints them, trying to secure love before abandonment arrives, trying to stay ahead of pain. The quiet child becomes anxious adult. The strategic child becomes controlling adult. The fearful child becomes successful, yet restless. And perhaps nowhere would this become clearer than in the greatest deception of Jacob's life. Because one day, a father grows old, a blessing waits, a brother grows vulnerable, and the quiet boy who learned survival through strategy will finally ask himself a dangerous question. If blessing may never come naturally, am I willing to take it? Most betrayals do not begin with evil. That is what makes them frightening. People imagine betrayal growing from cruelty, malice, cold hearts, bad intentions. But often, betrayal begins somewhere quieter. Fear, insecurity, scarcity, the unbearable feeling that if you do not act now, You may lose everything. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more psychologically human than Jacob's great deception. Because before Jacob became deceiver, he was simply someone afraid. Afraid blessing would never come. Afraid someone else would always be chosen. Afraid life had already decided there was not enough room for him. And fear. Fear changes morality. Fear whispers dangerous things. You deserve this. Life is unfair. No one will choose you naturally. Take what you need. Protect yourself. Secure your future. And perhaps Jacob had been hearing these whispers his entire life. Imagine him growing up beside Esau, the older brother, the stronger brother, the naturally admired brother, father's favorite, the obvious heir. Everything feeling tilted, everything feeling unequal. Meanwhile, Jacob watches, learns, adapts. The quieter child learning strategy, because strength feels unavailable. The younger son quietly fearing something terrible. If I wait, there may be nothing left for me. This fear matters enormously. Psychologists understand something painful about scarcity. People raised feeling emotionally insecure often become deeply afraid of loss. Loss of love, loss of security, loss of belonging, loss of opportunity, and fear of loss creates desperation. Desperate people make dangerous decisions, not always because they are selfish, because uncertainty feels unbearable. Could Jacob quietly fear life passing him by? Perhaps. Could years of comparison deepen insecurity? Absolutely. Imagine hearing subtle messages for years. Esau hunts. Esau impresses father. Esau inherits naturally. Esau belongs here more easily. Children absorb hierarchy quickly. And perhaps somewhere deep inside, Jacob quietly concluded, if blessing comes naturally, it will never come to me. Pause there. This belief changes people. Modern psychology calls it scarcity mindset. The belief there is not enough. Not enough love. Not enough approval. Not enough success. And scarcity changes behavior dramatically. People stop trusting life. Stop trusting fairness. Stop trusting patience. Instead, they control, manipulate, take, secure, anything reducing uncertainty. Still, the deception does not begin with Jacob alone. This matters, because family systems rarely produce dysfunction through one person. Isaac grows old, weak, eyes fading, mortality entering the house, and suddenly, the moment approaches. Blessing, inheritance, future, identity, everything ancient families built around. Isaac intends something simple. Call Esau, share meal, give blessing. Father, honoring firstborn son, natural, expected, perhaps even healing. Imagine Esau hearing the invitation. Maybe hope rises. Father still sees me. Father still chooses me. The mistakes did not erase everything. Perhaps for first time in years, security feels possible. Meanwhile, something happens elsewhere. Rebecca overhears. Fear awakens immediately, and fear rarely stays quiet. Not unresolved fear, not favoritism reinforced for decades, because perhaps Rebecca believes something deeply. Jacob must not lose. Jacob deserves blessing too. Maybe she remembers prophecy. Maybe she distrusts Esau. Maybe favoritism simply shaped perspective too deeply. Whatever the reason, she acts quickly, strategically, dangerously. And perhaps here lies uncomfortable truth. Parents sometimes unintentionally create the very pain they fear. Fear for one child often wounds another. Fear narrows vision. Fear justifies questionable choices. Modern families understand this too well. The parent overprotecting one child. The sibling quietly sacrificed emotionally. The favoritism nobody admits. The family system bending toward fear instead of fairness. Rebecca calls Jacob. Listen carefully. We are going to take blessing. Pause there. Can you imagine Jacob emotionally? Fear, opportunity, temptation, everything colliding. Because this moment feels psychologically enormous. Imagine the younger sibling finally standing near what always felt unreachable. The thing feared forever. The thing never expected naturally. Blessing, security, belonging, love. Would fear not become overwhelming? Jacob hesitates. Notice this carefully. He does not immediately agree. But listen closely to his hesitation. It is revealing. He does not say, "This feels wrong." He says, "What if we get caught?" Pause there. Psychology notices something important here. Fear already shaped morality. When people live long enough inside scarcity, the question stops becoming, "Is this right?" and becomes, "Will this work?" Could Jacob already justify deception internally? Possibly. Because fear changes ethical reasoning. If life feels unfair, taking feels reasonable, people rationalize constantly. He already has more. He deserves something too. No one gives me chance otherwise. How many people still do this? The coworker manipulating, the partner controlling, the friend dishonest. Not because they feel evil, because insecurity quietly whispers, "You have to protect yourself." Rebecca reassures him, "We will make this work." Imagine the emotional scene. Clothes borrowed, animal skins prepared, a son dressing like brother. Pause there again. Because perhaps nowhere feels sadder psychologically than this image. Jacob pretending to be Esau. Can you feel the heartbreak hidden underneath? A son believing he must become someone else. To receive blessing, this still happens constantly. The people pleaser becoming whoever earns approval. The child overachieving for love. The adult performing confidence. Pretending. Adapting. Wearing emotional costumes. Because somewhere deep down, they fear, who I really am may never be enough. Could Jacob carry this fear? Very likely. Imagine approaching Isaac, father blind, trusting, vulnerable. The room quiet, sacred almost, and Jacob lies, "I am Esau." Pause there. Few sentences reveal insecurity more painfully. Because deception often hides desperation. People lie most deeply when truth feels unsafe. Jacob fears honesty will fail. Truth feels risky. Performance feels safer. This matters enormously. Psychologists understand attachment wounds deeply. Children growing up uncertain about love often become adults controlling outcomes. If trust feels unreliable, manipulation feels safer. Control feels safer. Because vulnerability once hurt, Jacob likely feared, "If I trust life, life may disappoint me." Again, Shishak hesitates. The voice sounds wrong. Something feels strange, but age weakens certainty. Touch reassures him. Smell reassures him. And eventually, blessing comes. Words spoken. Future transferred. Identity shifted. Everything Jacob wanted finally arrives. Except, peace does not. Pause there. This matters deeply. Humans constantly believe achievement will silence fear. If I get promotion, if I find relationship, ye will feel safe. If I succeed, the anxiety disappears. Yet often, the thing arrives, and fear remains. Jacob gets blessing, but immediately, everything collapses. Esau returns. Truth surfaces. Isaac trembles violently. Esau cries bitterly. The family breaks, and suddenly, Jacob has what he wanted, yet loses home, loses trust, loses safety. How painfully human, because sometimes people chase things desperately, only to discover cost feels unbearable afterward. Psychologists call this post-attainment emptiness. The realization, he got what I wanted, but not how I imagined. Success mixed with guilt, achievement mixed with loneliness. Could Jacob feel this? Imagine hearing Esau cry, "Bless me too." The heartbreak, the betrayal, the grief, your brother devastated, your father shattered, your family broken, and suddenly, blessing feels heavy. Fear grows. Esau wants revenge. Jacob must run. The child afraid of losing security finally gets security and immediately loses everything else. This becomes Jacob's paradox. He stole blessing because he feared not receiving it, yet receiving it brought exile, loneliness, consequences, and perhaps the deepest tragedy of all. He still did not feel secure, because stolen security rarely feels safe. Humans know this instinctively. The relationship built through manipulation, the success built dishonestly, the validation earned artificially. Deep down, fear remains. What if it disappears? What if people find out? What if I never deserved this? Still, let us remain compassionate. Jacob was not monster. He was wounded, afraid, insecure, trying desperately to secure what he feared life would never freely give him. Pain shaped choices. Fear shaped morality. The quiet child finally reaching for blessing, even if imperfectly, even disastrously. And maybe that is why his story still matters. Because many people secretly live like Jacob, trying to secure love through performance, trying to control outcomes, trying to manipulate uncertainty, all because somewhere deep down, they fear not being enough. And perhaps the hardest truth Jacob would eventually learn was this: you cannot steal peace, even if you steal blessing, because somewhere ahead, the deceiver will finally become deceived. The manipulator will lose control. The runaway will face loneliness. And the man who feared never being chosen will eventually wrestle with the terrifying question: can someone who built life through fear ever truly change? There is a strange kind of loneliness that arrives after getting exactly what you wanted. The promotion finally comes, but peace does not. The relationship finally happens, yet guilt remains. The dream becomes real, but something still feels unfinished, because sometimes humans chase things desperately, only to realize the cost arrives later. Quietly, patiently, and perhaps no biblical figure understood this pain more than Jacob, because after the blessing came, exile followed, fear followed, loneliness followed, and the boy who spent childhood trying desperately to secure safety suddenly found himself completely alone. Imagine the moment: the house shattered, Esau furious, Isaac grieving, Rebekah afraid, the family no longer safe, and Jacob runs. Pause there, because running changes people, especially running born from consequences. Not adventure, not calling, fear. Jacob does not leave triumphantly. He flees. The younger brother who finally secured blessing can no longer stay home. How painfully ironic. He wins, yet loses belonging. He gets inheritance, yet forfeits safety. And perhaps here begins one of the deepest emotional truths in Jacob's story. You can escape a place, but rarely escape yourself. Imagine the road, no familiar faces, no mother's protection, no home, no certainty. The strategic child who always tried controlling outcomes, suddenly unable to control anything. This matters psychologically. People built around control often struggle profoundly when life becomes uncertain. The planner without answers, the achiever without direction, the manipulator without leverage, because identity built around certainty collapses quickly inside uncertainty. And Jacob enters uncertainty completely alone. For first time, no mother protecting him, no family dynamics familiar enough to predict, no safety net, just road, fear, consequences, loneliness. Psychologists understand something important here. Loneliness changes people, especially prolonged loneliness. The noise disappears. The distractions weaken. People finally hear themselves. Sometimes for first time. Could guilt follow? Jacob, imagine nights alone. Memory replaying. Father's trembling voice. Esau's bitter cry. The image of betrayal. The family fracture. Because consequences travel. Even when people leave, especially emotional consequences. Many people understand this feeling. The relationship ruined. The family broken. The apology never made. The mistake following memory. Distance changes scenery. Not unresolved pain. And perhaps, somewhere inside Jacob, something terrifying begins happening. The realization. Maybe I caused this. This matters. Because growth rarely begins without confrontation. Painful confrontation. Still, loneliness has a strange way of creating transformation. And one night, exhausted, Jacob sleeps beneath open sky. No home, no certainty. Only rock beneath head. Pause there. Can you feel the symbolism? The man who spent life chasing security now sleeps with nothing. No comfort, no protection, no guarantees. And yet, something extraordinary happens. A dream, a ladder stretching toward heaven. Angels ascending and descending. And somehow, in the middle of exile, promise appears. God speaks. Not condemnation, not rejection. Promise, protection, future. This feels deeply surprising, because many people secretly expect abandonment after failure, especially people carrying shame. Jacob lied, manipulated, ran, yet heaven still speaks. This matters psychologically, because shame often convinces people. You ruined everything. You are now your worst moment. But growth rarely begins through shame alone. Growth begins through truth, mixed with grace. Could this moment reshape Jacob? Perhaps. Yet transformation remains slow. Humans rarely change overnight, especially people shaped by fear. Fear takes time to unwind, and Jacob's journey continues. Eventually, he arrives somewhere new. A new land, a new family, a new beginning. So, he thinks, because life has a strange habit of teaching people through mirrors, especially people avoiding lessons. And perhaps nowhere becomes more important than the moment Jacob sees Rachel. Rachel. Imagine her arrival. Beautiful. Unexpected. Hope appearing inside loneliness. Perhaps for first time in years. Joy enters. Love enters. Possibility enters. Jacob falls deeply. Quickly. Intensely. Can we blame him? Lonely people often love intensely. Especially people starving emotionally. Especially people searching for belonging. Rachel becomes hope. Future. Healing, perhaps. And maybe something deeper too. The thing finally making exile worth enduring. Jacob agrees to work 7 years. 7 years. Pause there. People shaped by insecurity rarely wait patiently. Yet love changes things. Or perhaps desperation changes things. The scriptures say 7 years felt like only days because of his love. Beautiful sentence. Almost cinematic. The lonely man finally believing, maybe life can become different. Maybe I can build something beautiful. Maybe running finally ends here. Except, life had another lesson waiting. Because the deceiver is about to become deceived. The wedding arrives. Celebration, expectation, hope. Everything finally unfolding. And then, mourning comes. Pause there. Mourning. Perhaps one of Scripture's most psychologically brutal details. Mourning reveals truth. It is not Rachel. It is Leah. Leah. Can you imagine the shock? Confusion. Anger. Humiliation. Betrayal. Everything collapsing instantly. The man who once disguised identity now experiences deception himself. The manipulator manipulated. The liar lied to. The betrayer betrayed. Psychologists sometimes call this mirroring. Life forcing confrontation through repetition. The thing you caused, returning differently. Not punishment exactly. Awareness. Because pain humans create often becomes pain humans eventually understand. Jacob protests. Laban explains. More work required. More waiting. More uncertainty. And suddenly, control disappears again. The strategic child cannot strategize enough. Life, no longer obeys planning. Many adults eventually reach this moment. The realization, he cannot control everything. He cannot manipulate healing. He cannot outrun consequences. And perhaps nowhere becomes sadder than Jacob's family life. 2 wives, competition, jealousy, children born into emotional imbalance. Sound familiar? Pause there. History quietly repeats. The child raised inside favoritism. Now living inside favoritism again. Rachel loved more. Leah overlooked. The family system repeating old wounds. Psychologists understand something painful. People often recreate unresolved childhood dynamics unconsciously. Not intentionally, automatically. The child wounded by comparison unknowingly creates comparison. The person shaped by emotional scarcity repeats scarcity. Pain unhealed becomes pattern. Jacob once feared unequal love. Now he unintentionally creates unequal love. This feels hauntingly human, because many adults eventually become what hurt them. Not fully, but partially, unless awareness interrupts. Could Jacob feel trapped by repeating patterns? Perhaps. Years pass. Children arrive. Conflict grows. Family complexity deepens. And still, perhaps something inside Jacob remains restless. Because running changes shape, people stop physically running, yet emotionally continue. Through work, relationships, control, achievement, trying desperately not to face deeper wounds. Still, time changes people. Pain changes people. Loneliness changes people. Jacob slowly grows older, wiser perhaps, tired perhaps, and eventually, the past returns. Because no one outruns unfinished relationships forever. Especially family relationships. Especially sibling betrayal. Word arrives. Esau approaches. Pause there. Can you imagine the fear? Years later, still terrified, still remembering, still carrying consequences. Because unresolved guilt stays alive. And suddenly, the younger brother who spent lifetime running must face the thing he feared most. His past, his brother, his guilt, and perhaps for first time, Jacob begins understanding something terrifying. The hardest consequences are not external. They live inside memory, inside shame, Inside, unfinished pain. Because eventually, everyone must stop running. And somewhere ahead, Jacob will face a night stranger than anything before. A night of wrestling. A night of breaking. A night asking one impossible question. Can a person built around fear ever become someone new? Some biblical characters feel easy to understand. The hero, the villain, the faithful one, the failure. Simple categories, comfortable categories. But Jacob refuses simplicity. Because the deeper people study his story, the more uncomfortable the questions become. Was he truly chosen? Or simply clever, faithful, manipulative, a spiritual giant, or merely a wounded survivor learning how to outsmart life? And perhaps nowhere in Scripture does destiny feel more controversial than in the story of Jacob. Because honestly, at first glance, Jacob does not feel particularly heroic. He manipulates, deceives, controls, takes advantage of weakness, lies to his blind father, steals blessing, runs from consequences. And perhaps many modern readers quietly ask, why him? Why would God choose someone like this? Why Jacob? Why not Esau? After all, Esau feels simpler, direct, honest, physical, emotionally transparent. Meanwhile, Jacob feels complicated, calculating, anxious, strategic, often morally messy. So again, why Jacob? This question matters deeply, because secretly, many people ask similar questions about themselves. Why do some people seem chosen while others struggle? Why do imperfect people succeed? Why do messy people receive grace? Why do deeply flawed humans still somehow matter? And perhaps Jacob's controversy begins before birth. The scriptures say something startling before the twins even emerge. A prophecy appears. The older will serve the younger. Pause there. Imagine hearing this. Immediately controversy begins. Did Jacob steal blessing? Or was blessing always meant for him? This changes everything. If destiny already existed, was Jacob wrong? Or merely impatient? If God intended Jacob's future, why manipulation? Why deception? Why family collapse? The tension feels enormous. Some readers conclude, Jacob simply fulfilled divine plan. The end was already written. He was chosen. Period. But others push back. Chosen, perhaps. Yet choices still matter. And this matters enormously. Because destiny does not erase morality. People still make decisions. People still hurt others. People still carry responsibility. Jacob's manipulation remains manipulation. Fear does not erase consequences. Purpose does not erase ethics. Psychologists might phrase it differently. Can wounded behavior still coexist with meaningful purpose? Absolutely, because humans are complicated. Very complicated. Many deeply meaningful people remain deeply flawed. Parents, leaders, teachers, pastors, artists, survivors. Wounded people still shape history. In fact, sometimes wounds become fuel. Could Jacob's fear partly shape his destiny? Perhaps. Let us examine him honestly. Imagine Jacob emotionally, younger sibling, quiet child, growing beside stronger brother, watching favoritism, feeling uncertainty, perhaps quietly fearing. He may never naturally receive blessing. Fear grows. Fear teaches survival. Control becomes safety. Strategy becomes protection. This feels psychologically believable. Many anxious children grow into highly strategic adults. Not because they enjoy manipulation, because unpredictability once hurt. Control feels safer than trust. Psychologists understand something important. Children growing up emotionally insecure often develop adaptive intelligence, reading rooms carefully, planning constantly, anticipating outcomes, managing relationships strategically. The child learns, if life feels uncertain, stay prepared. Could Jacob become manipulative partly through survival? Possibly. This matters because manipulation often hides fear, not always evil. Fear. Fear of loss. Fear of rejection. Fear of scarcity. Fear of not mattering. Modern people understand this more than they realize. The overachiever terrified of failure. The controlling partner terrified of abandonment. The perfectionist terrified of disappointment. The person constantly planning because uncertainty feels unsafe. Many behaviors, labeled manipulative, began originally as protection. Still, protection can become damage. This matters too, because fear explains behavior. Fear does not justify betrayal. Jacob lied. Repeatedly, the father trusted him. He exploited vulnerability. The brother suffered. The family fractured. No psychological explanation removes responsibility. And perhaps this is why Jacob feels so controversial, because he feels morally gray, neither hero nor villain, neither innocent nor monstrous, just painfully human. A wounded person making damaging decisions. How uncomfortable, because humans prefer certainty. Good people, bad people, but real life rarely works that way. Jacob may have genuinely feared losing everything and still harmed people. He may have deeply loved family and still betrayed family. Both things coexist. Psychologists call this moral complexity. Humans carrying contradictory truths simultaneously. Still, the theological question remains, why would God choose someone like Jacob? Honestly, perhaps that question misunderstands something important. Maybe biblical chosenness was never reward for perfection. Pause there. This changes everything. What if being chosen was never proof of moral superiority? What if chosen people remain deeply broken people? Look across Scripture. Moses doubts. David fails. Peter denies. Paul persecutes. Human weakness appears constantly. Perhaps God chooses people not because they are flawless, but because transformation remains possible. And perhaps nowhere feels clearer than Jacob, because Jacob changes, slowly, painfully, not overnight, not magically. He experiences loneliness, fear, consequences, humiliation, loss of control. The deceiver becomes deceived. The manipulator loses power. The planner faces uncertainty. Life reshapes him. And then comes the strangest moment, the wrestling. Jacob alone at night, fighting mystery, fighting stranger, fighting himself perhaps, and suddenly the manipulator stops manipulating. Pause there. This matters psychologically. For first time, Jacob cannot strategize his way out, cannot lie, cannot control, only wrestle, only endure, only confront, and perhaps that becomes metaphor for healing itself. Healing feels like wrestling, painful, messy, exhausting, identity breaking apart, old strategies failing, new self slowly emerging. Jacob receives new name, Israel. The deceiver transformed, not perfect, but changed. Wounded, but changed. And perhaps this changes controversy entirely. Maybe Jacob was both, chosen and manipulative, wounded and responsible, survivor and deceiver, faithful and fearful, because humans contain contradictions, especially traumatized humans. Especially survivors. Many people still live this tension, the parent trying hard, yet repeating old wounds, the partner loving deeply, yet struggling trust. The successful person secretly driven by fear. The spiritual person still emotionally broken. Humans rarely heal instantly. Growth remains uneven, messy, complicated. Jacob feels relevant precisely because of this. He reminds people transformation is possible. Without pretending damage never happened, the family still suffered. Esau still cried. Trust still broke. Consequences remained real. Yet life continued. Growth happened. Healing slowly entered. Could Jacob still deserve criticism? Absolutely. Could Jacob still deserve compassion? Also, yes. This feels deeply important, because modern culture swings constantly between extremes. Cancel people entirely, or excuse everything entirely. Jacob invites harder truth, understanding without excusing, compassion without denial, accountability without hopelessness, because perhaps deepest controversy was never, was Jacob good? Maybe better question is, can broken people still become meaningful people? And perhaps Jacob quietly answers, yes, but not without wrestling. Not without honesty, not without pain, not without confronting the parts of yourself fear built. And maybe this becomes the haunting question. Jacob still asks humanity, Yari, your flaws, proof you are disqualified, or proof transformation has not finished yet. Because perhaps chosen people are not extraordinary people. Perhaps chosen people are simply people willing, eventually, to stop running and wrestle honestly with who they have become. What if Jacob lived today? Not in tents, not among shepherds, not wandering deserts under ancient skies, but here, now, inside modern cities, modern families, modern anxieties. Would we recognize him? Or would he simply look painfully familiar? Because perhaps the uncomfortable truth is this. The modern world is full of Jacobs, people smiling politely on the outside, while quietly carrying fear underneath everything. People appearing responsible, yet secretly terrified life may collapse if they stop controlling it. People successful, strategic, reliable, yet exhausted. Anxious, restless, trying desperately to feel safe. Because maybe Jacob never disappeared. Maybe he simply changed clothing, changed language, changed environment. But the wound stayed the same. Imagine modern Jacob as child, quiet, observant, sensitive. The child noticing everything, the atmosphere in the room, the mood of parents, the subtle differences between siblings. Children like Jacob often become emotional detectives, especially in homes shaped by favoritism, especially when love feels uneven. Imagine growing up with sibling comparison. One child naturally admired, athletic, outgoing, easy to understand, the golden child. Meanwhile, you feel quieter, different, harder to notice. Maybe dad naturally connects with sibling more. Maybe mom protects you more. And suddenly, family divides emotionally. No screaming necessary. Children feel it anyway. Psychologists understand this deeply. Favoritism shapes identity wounds. The child quietly asks, why them? What do they have that I do not? Will anyone choose me? Naturally. Could modern Jacob grow up carrying this insecurity? Almost certainly. And insecurity changes people, especially quiet children, because quiet children rarely express fear loudly. They adapt. They survive strategically. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. The nervous system becoming extremely alert, reading rooms carefully, watching people carefully, anticipating problems, trying to stay emotionally safe. The child learns, if life feels unpredictable, prepare. If love feels uncertain, earn it. If belonging feels fragile, control outcomes. And suddenly, Modern Jacob becomes the anxious overthinker, the planner, the perfectionist, the person checking every possibility before relaxing. People say, he is responsible, she is organized. He thinks ahead, but underneath often lives fear. Not confidence, fear. Fear of disappointment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of losing what matters. Imagine Jacob in school, smart, observant, maybe not loudest person in room, not most naturally charismatic, but strategic, the child quietly figuring systems out, how teachers work, how social groups work, how success works. Children shaped by insecurity often become highly competent, because competence feels safer than vulnerability. If people admire success, become successful. If achievement earns approval, achieve constantly. Modern Jacob may become perfectionist adult, the employee overworking, the entrepreneur obsessing, the student terrified of failure, not because ambition alone drives them, because failure feels emotionally dangerous. The child, once afraid of being overlooked, becomes adult, afraid of losing worth. How many people understand this feeling? The constant pressure, the overthinking, the inability to relax, the fear everything falls apart if control disappears. This becomes huge in relationships too, because people shaped by emotional uncertainty often struggle trusting love. Imagine modern Jacob dating, deeply loving, yet deeply anxious, fearful of rejection, fearful of abandonment, fearful someone stronger, better, easier to love might replace him. This creates attachment anxiety. Psychologists recognize it immediately. Overthinking texts, needing reassurance, trying to secure closeness constantly. Control disguised as love, not because they are manipulative monsters, because insecurity whispers constantly. People leave, love shifts. You must secure connection. Could Jacob become controlling? Possibly. Not intentionally harmful. Fearful. Fearful people often micromanage relationships. Want certainty. Want guarantees. Want reassurance. Want predictability. Because unpredictability once hurt, this still happens constantly. The partner checking location, the spouse needing constant validation, the parent overprotecting children, the friend struggling trust. Underneath often lives younger wound, the child afraid nobody naturally chooses them. Modern Jacob may also struggle with identity. Pause there, because identity wounds run deep. Jacob literally spent life asking, who am I? The younger brother, the deceiver, the chosen son, the manipulator, the survivor. Modern people still live this confusion, especially people growing up around comparison. The child constantly measured against sibling, the person changing personality to fit expectations, the adult secretly unsure. Would people love me if I stopped performing? Psychologists call this conditional worth, the belief. It matter only when I succeed, only when useful, only when impressive, only when needed. This becomes exhausting. Modern Jacob may look successful externally, career thriving, responsible, dependable, yet internally, always restless, always anxious, always waiting for loss. Because people shaped by insecurity often struggle feeling safe even during success. Remember something important. Jacob stole blessing, yet still felt afraid. This matters enormously, because external achievement rarely heals internal fear. Modern people constantly discover this. Promotion comes, still anxious. Marriage happens, still insecure. Money increases, still restless. Achievement changes circumstances, not wounds. Healing requires deeper work, and perhaps nowhere feels more modern than Jacob's relationship with control. Psychologists understand something painful. Control often hides anxiety. The person needing everything organized, everything predictable, everything planned. Not because they love perfection, because uncertainty feels terrifying. Could modern Jacob struggle anxiety disorder? Possibly. Overthinking, worst-case scenarios, emotional exhaustion, constant mental planning. The nervous system stuck preparing for disappointment. Many high-functioning, anxious adults quietly live like this. Successful, competent, secretly exhausted. People praise them. You have everything together. Meanwhile, inside feels chaotic. Jacob would likely understand. Still, let us say something hopeful. Modern Jacob is not doomed. This matters deeply, because anxious people heal, wounded people grow, controllers learn trust, fearful people become safer emotionally. Psychologists increasingly recognize something beautiful. Awareness interrupts survival patterns. The moment someone notices, over-control because I fear loss, manipulate because rejection scares me, overwork because approval feels unsafe, overthink because uncertainty frightens me. Healing begins. Not instantly, but genuinely. Therapy helps. Honest relationships help. Emotional language helps. Faith helps. Self-awareness changes everything. Imagine modern Jacob finally realizing, my fear shaped me. My childhood shaped me. But fear does not have to own me forever. This changes lives. And perhaps nowhere feels more powerful than Jacob's turning point, the wrestling. Symbolic, perhaps. The moment survival strategies stop working. The moment performance fails. The moment people confront themselves honestly. Modern people experience this too. Burnout, panic attacks, divorce, grief, crisis. The moment life forces question. Who am I underneath fear? Modern Jacob eventually learns something profound. Control cannot create peace. Only healing creates peace. This matters because many adults still secretly live in survival mode. Planning, managing, controlling, achieving, trying desperately to feel safe. Yet, safety never arrives. Because healing begins only when people stop running, stop performing, stop pretending, and finally ask, what wound am I still trying to outrun? If Jacob lived today, he might look ordinary, successful, responsible, quietly anxious, highly capable, deeply loving, emotionally tired, the kind of person everyone admires, without noticing how hard survival feels internally. And perhaps the deepest question Jacob still asks modern people is this: are you truly living, or simply surviving the fears your childhood quietly taught you? Because sometimes the strongest people, simply the most frightened people who learned how to plan really well. For most of his life, Jacob ran from consequences, ran from guilt, ran from conflict, ran from fear, ran from the version of himself he did not fully understand. And perhaps that is what makes his story feel painfully human. Because humans run too. Not always physically. Most running looks quieter than that. People run through work, through success, through relationships, through distraction, through perfectionism, through achievement, through busyness, through pretending. Anything avoiding the deeper question waiting underneath. What am I really afraid to face? Because perhaps the hardest truth about healing is this: healing rarely begins while people are still running. Running feels productive, safe, necessary, but running has cost. The faster people run, the harder honest self-awareness becomes. And Jacob spent years building life while still carrying unresolved fear. The child afraid of not being enough became adult, trying to secure blessing. The younger brother, afraid of being overlooked, became man, controlling outcomes. The deceiver kept moving, kept building, kept surviving. Yet survival and healing are not the same thing. Pause there. This distinction changes everything. Many people survive beautifully. They function, work hard, build families, pay bills, smile in photographs, look successful. Yet, internally, still frightened, still exhausted, still carrying younger versions of themselves nobody notices, still surviving wounds never fully named. Jacob understood this, because even after success, fear remained. Children, wealth, influence, still anxious, still preparing, still afraid of loss. Especially when news finally arrived. Isar's coming. Pause there again. Can you imagine the terror? Years later, still afraid, still remembering betrayal, still haunted by consequences. This matters deeply, because unhealed pain rarely disappears with time. Time changes scenery, not wounds. Many adults quietly learn this. The painful childhood memory still stings at 40. The old betrayal still shapes trust at 60. The parent's voice still echoes decades later. People often mistake avoidance for healing. He moved on. He do not think about it anymore. I am fine. Meanwhile, the body remembers. The relationships remember. The anxiety remembers. Jacob spent years running. Yet fear remained alive, because what remains unfaced remains powerful. Psychologists increasingly understand something important. Avoidance strengthens fear. The thing people avoid emotionally often grows larger internally. The avoided conversation, the unresolved grief, the buried shame, the unfinished family pain. Silence protects temporarily, but costs deeply over time. And perhaps this is why Jacob's greatest transformation begins not through success, but confrontation. The wrestling, alone at night, darkness, uncertainty, fear everywhere. No strategy left, no manipulation left, no control left, only struggle. Pause there, because perhaps this moment becomes symbolic for all healing. Healing feels like wrestling. Messy, painful, exhausting, old identities resisting change, fear refusing surrender. The nervous system screaming, stay the same, protect yourself, keep controlling. Yet something deeper whispers, you cannot survive like this forever. Jacob wrestles until dawn, until weakness, until breaking, until limping. And suddenly, something strange happens. He receives new name. Not Jacob, Israel. Pause there again. A new name, a new identity. Why does this matter? Because healing often begins with identity change, not pretending past never happened, not erasing mistakes, not rewriting history, but learning. I am more than survival. I am more than fear. I am more than what wounded me. Modern psychology increasingly agrees. Healing is not becoming different person. Healing is becoming fuller person. The fearful child still exists. The anxious child still exists, but no longer drives everything. The wound stops becoming entire identity. This matters enormously, because many adults still secretly live inside younger selves. The child afraid of rejection, still controlling relationships. The child overlooked, still overachieving. The child abandoned, still terrified intimacy disappears. The child criticized, still perfectionistic. And people wonder, why am I exhausted? Because survival patterns consume enormous energy. Running consumes enormous energy. Pretending consumes enormous energy. Control consumes enormous energy. Jacob likely felt this deeply. Years of strategizing, years of surviving, years of trying desperately to feel secure. And perhaps, somewhere inside, tiredness finally arrived. The kind of tiredness many adults secretly understand. The exhaustion of constantly protecting yourself, constantly preparing, constantly fearing. Eventually, people become tired of surviving, and tiredness sometimes becomes doorway to healing. Because healing often begins where pride finally ends, where people finally say, "You cannot do this alone anymore. You cannot control everything anymore. You cannot outrun this anymore." This feels terrifying, especially for people like Jacob. Controllers struggle surrender. Planners struggle uncertainty. Anxious people struggle trust. Yet trust becomes essential. Not passive trust, honest trust. The willingness to stop performing constantly. To stop earning worth constantly. To stop pretending safety only exists through control. Modern people desperately need this lesson. Because today's culture rewards running. Stay busy. Stay productive. Stay distracted. Never slow down. Never feel deeply. Never confront wounds. Yet, emotional avoidance quietly destroys people. Relationships suffer. Anxiety grows. Burnout arrives. Identity fractures. The past quietly keeps speaking. And perhaps Jacob whispers something different. Stop running. Not because stopping feels easy, because running eventually costs too much. This matters for family wounds too. Many people spend decades avoiding family pain. The favoritism, the rejection, the betrayal, the parent wound, the sibling resentment. Avoidance feels easier until suddenly life feels smaller. Fear feels larger. Bitterness grows. Healing often begins when someone finally says, "This hurt me. This shaped me. This still affects me. And I want something different." Pause there. That sentence changes generations. Because awareness interrupts inheritance. The child once shaped by fear can become safer parent. The anxious adult can learn peace. The controlling partner can learn trust. The wounded sibling can learn forgiveness. Cycles stop somewhere. Why not here? Why not now? Still, healing does not mean perfection. Jacob still limped. Notice this. The wound remained. Healing rarely erases scars. People often expect, once healed, no fear, no sadness, no struggle. Reality feels gentler than that. Healing means wound no longer owns identity. The scar remains, but stops controlling direction. Jacob still remembered, still carried history, still carried consequences, yet no longer running. And perhaps that becomes the deepest lesson of all. Healing begins not when pain disappears, but when people stop letting pain decide who they are. Modern people need permission to hear this. You can be wounded and still grow. Anxious and still heal. Broken and still meaningful. Afraid and still loved. Your survival patterns make sense. But survival patterns do not deserve permanent authority. Because maybe the hardest thing humans ever learn is this. The person you became to survive is not always the person you must remain forever. And perhaps Jacob leaves one final haunting question for every generation. What would change in your life if you finally stopped running from the wounds still shaping you? Because healing rarely begins with answers. Healing usually begins with something simpler. Stopping, turning around, and finally facing what fear spent years trying to outrun.